Welcome back and many thanks for staying with us. Yes, after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, that is around December of 2019, but I had been watching the COVID-19 pandemic from August of 2019. Yes, but then when Uganda did call for a lockdown in 2020, that was around March, we did see a skyrocketing number of COVID-19 cases. Yes, but then as the cases also rose, there are also cases of domestic violence. Yes, people are being locked with their perpetrators. Yes, a child is being locked with someone who was actually abusing this child. You get a child from a school, you put her or him in a setting with this perpetrator for over 8 or so months. So we saw an increase in domestic violence, gender-based violence, sexual gender-based violence, and so forth as a result of the lockdowns that were put in place to stop the contraction and the spread of COVID-19. So if the situation was worse in 2020, what is the situation now? We have Irene Nena. She's from the Gender Office from Church of Uganda, with whom we are going to be expounding on this conversation. What has the church done? You saw me talking about this issue the whole of 2020. What is the church doing to actually alleviate the suffering of people who are being who are grappling with their perpetrators in their homes? What is the church doing? Because the churches at that time are also shut down. So we are now open. All right? Yes. What are they doing to ensure that the flock is also protected? A very good morning, Irene Nena.
Thank you, Romeo.
Indeed.
A very good morning to you too.
2020 was the year we saw a skyrocketing number of domestic violence cases, take center stage. What is the situation now? Would you say that it has gotten worse?
One thing for sure is gender-based violence, including domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence, has been on the background, like people were in kind of some denial and not being cognizant of the fact that gender-based violence has been a problem in the country for a long time, until the lockdown situation came up as a result of COVID-19. And we started seeing reports coming in the social media, loud outcries of the cases of gender-based violence, and one of them being domestic violence on the rise. And so the situation isn't in any way better as of now, because truth is our economy hasn't yet gone back to what it used to be. And if you do an analysis of what caused the skyrocketing cases of domestic violence especially, is because a lot of people had to start struggling, staying together for quite some time. People have not been staying together. The stress of people losing their jobs amongst others, and also failing to provide for the family. So all those came as a shock to many families, hence escalating cases of domestic violence.
Of course, the lockdown in 2020 played a bigger part in helping exacerbate this problem, because many of the victims were locked with the perpetrators. But in 2021, the lockdown is almost non-existent, except for the bars and a few other sectors. So why are we still seeing skyrocketing numbers of domestic violence even after sections of the lockdown have been lifted?
I wouldn't say that it has been lifted as such, but truth is domestic violence has been a persistent problem that we fail to acknowledge. One of the things has been that there's been a lot of silence about that pandemic. I should call it the silent pandemic. Like, there's been silence. People are not breaking the issues that they were facing around domestic violence until we realize that, people are given space to speak about it, open up and report. That's when people started coming up. And so even then, we still see that continue to happen because families are still struggling. It's like, a lot of, I should also link it to inability to provide for families. Most of our families are struggling economically. Even socially, people are struggling to coexist. And so some of these stress, escalates the cases of domestic violence. But then also we are not only looking at domestic violence per se in the lockdown period. Teenage pregnancy has been one of the biggest problems that the country is yet to, to battle with. We are at the moment bound to have a baby boom, especially amongst the teenage girls.
Indeed.
People have not been in school. A lot of exposure to what we didn't expect, especially amongst the young girls, as you know, made majority of the girls be pregnant.
Well, of course, I was doing the People's Parliament at the tail end of 2020, and we found out in Kamale alone, 5,000 young girls had gotten pregnant in that jurisdiction alone. But then we would like to know, what is the church doing about all this? Why is the church, or do you feel, as Mrs. Anena Irene, that the church is too silent about these issues in the violent home situations? What can be done about it?
I wouldn't say the church has been silent, because even when the places of worship were, you know, shut, the church continued to serve. We've had cell meetings in different, you know, structures of the churches, where families have been able to be reached through those structures. We've been able to, as the church, has been able to provide counseling and mediation to some families, but then also the church has been able to promote through the different spaces and engagements that they have, messages of violence-free families, messages of peaceful coexistence, messages of ensuring protection for the women and girls especially, who constitute the majority of gender-based violence or domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence.
All right, do you think that has worked, the issue of the messages? Do you think they've reached the recipients and achieved the desired effect? Because we are talking about people who are going through very tough situations. If I'm locked up somewhere and I'm being used everywhere, I might not get the message from the church. Is there a tangible strategy by the church to go to these homesteads and actually assess the situation within which these young children, women and girls, are living?
Yes, I see that there is actually an impact. If we see the case, I mean the increasing number of people coming to the religious leaders to seek support, to ask for help, that to me is an indicator of a positive impact, because then the communities or the people that we serve as the church are beginning to be cognizant of the contribution of the religious leaders as key stakeholders in supporting them in those times of difficult needs. Yeah.
Don't you think this is a time the doctor has to go to the patient and not the other way around, Irene? That's the point of contention that I'm having right now.
One of the things is that we are, as the church, have been able to try to identify the troubled family, I should say, and then be able to see how do we support these families. For instance, if we know that because then we do realize sometimes it's very difficult for survivors of gender-based violence to come up, especially around domestic violence. It's very difficult to open up because of negative perception, you know, people judging you, and also the kind of socialization process to think that domestic violence is a bedroom matter. So we've been able to ensure that there are structures on the ground, that their capacities have been enhanced with the skills to be able to identify this struggling family and provide for them support.
Irene, would you say that the violence we experience as children is what continues when we become adults?
Yes, I would say that, because violence breeds violence. When a child grows up in a violent home, they are bound to be perpetrators of gender-based violence, because of then they would think that that is a normal, you know, way of living. This is how life is supposed to be. So that kind of normalization, you know, mindset eventually will continue to have a cycle of violence happening. And that to me is the more reason that we need to now think and reflect as families. How are we living? What kind of example are we showing our children? What kind of example are we showing the communities that we interact with? Because then if we need a future that is, you know, peaceful, having respect and treating one another with dignity, then we need to now start with showing good examples to the children.
Mrs. Anena, I'll use myself as an example. I didn't grow up in a violent home, but I grew up in a violent neighborhood. You needed to learn how to protect yourself. So I became defensive. That is me. That is Romy Busiku. I'm very defensive of myself based on that very, very violent environment that I grew up in. But then what about the girls? What can they do to protect themselves in these violent neighborhoods, the young girls?
One thing for sure that I wouldn't want to start with the girls. Children are always children and they remain vulnerable. And so for me, I would start with the parents, that we have a lot of parental roles to ensure the safety of our children. Even before we get out to, you know, ask the government or demand the government to provide this safety for our girls, we need to do it as parents. We need to start right from the home. I mean, a lot of girls get out of home and nobody knows where they're going, the kind of company they're keeping. No one is concerned who is getting in and out of their home. And so they're at large, and that in itself exposes them to a lot of risk of being violated.
Do you think social media and all these technological advancements have also played a role in putting these young girls at risk
I would say
of sexual gender-based violence and so forth?
I would say it's a yes and a no. Why I say a yes is especially where children are having access to, you know, technology and without being guided. So most cases we don't know what they kind of see from the different, you know, social media. They are reading informations that possibly is, you know, age inappropriate. And then in that way they are discovering things and, you know, want to experience it, wants to adventure what they've seen. And so then, yes, it can expose. And so we have a role.
I'm looking at it from this angle whereby she's talking to an unscrupulous individual she has never met. According to this guy's Facebook profile, it shows he's only 21. But in reality, this guy is 65. And this young lady, being 20 or 21 herself, is thinking, I'm speaking to a peer of my age. So this guy proposes, can we meet, and so forth. The young girl thinks she's meeting a 21-year-old, only to end in a trap with a 65-year-old man. Yes.
Yes, Romeo, it's very unfortunate that that's happening, that a lot of girls have been, you know, getting into, should I call it, for lack of a better word, online dating. And it's, of course, a blind date. And then you find yourself in a situation that you've totally been compromised. And so then it also takes us to the responsibility, you know, the men who are doing that. How would you feel if that was your own daughter? Would you want someone else to do that? It's for me, I throw it as a question of self-reflection to the men especially, who are taking advantage of the girls because of the social media.
All right. Okay, let's cap this with what you think, whether or not we should be counseling parents now more than ever. If you've been talking to a parent for the last 10 years, they'll tell you, don't tell me how to raise my child. So should we be having a conversation on counseling parents on how to take care of their children? Isn't this the right time? That's the final question.
Yes, it is the right time. And I'm happy to share that the church has launched positive parenting guidelines, which to me is really a milestone into seeing that this information is reached out. And this helps to see what role do I have as a parent to ensure total protection for the family that I have, to raise them, you know, in an upright way, to ensure that they are not endangered in any way. So yes.
During this venture, do you go to the parents and the families assess the situation, or do you call on to them to come to you?
One of the things that is happening is the church is taking up on its spaces, and I'm happy that places of worship have resumed. And so it's an opportunity for the church to, you know, disseminate this information, but then we also have them printed out to be shared out to anybody who is able to have access to it, and then that information is widely circulated.
A beautiful conversation I've been having with Mrs. Irene Anene. She's from the gender office at the Church of Uganda. Yes, Irene Anene, before I let you go, this one yes or no kind of question.
Yes,
should we be going to the patient as the doctors, church, police, whoever? Should we be going to the victims instead of asking them to come to us? Yes or no?
One of the things is, I wouldn't want to say it's not a yes or no, but because we also see a situation of respecting someone's decision. Because, for instance,
no, I'm locked out in the house. I can't move. I can't go to the church. That's why we are saying we should be going to them, because I could be captive in a house and I can't come to you. But if you visit my house, do some assessment, that's when you would find out there's a child locked in a bedroom.
Yes, then we need to visit the houses.
She agrees. That's
Yes.
great. Thank you, Mrs. Irene Nena. She's from the Gender Office at the Church of Uganda. We'll call on you some other time to expand more on this conversation.
Thank you, Romeo.
And of course, you're still watching the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at NTV. Let's take a breather. We'll be right back with the biggest conversation